Hello and welcome to The Hated and the Dead with Tom Lehman. Good news. This is the second episode of this weekend. Productivity has doubled in just 7 days, and you can help make this a more common occurrence by leaving a rating on Apple Podcast. This is by far the best way to keep the podcast active and hopefully, in the long run, profitable. This episode concerns Nikola Gruevski, who served as Prime Minister of Macedonia between 2006 and 2016. A highly intelligent and charismatic man, Gruevski became Prime Minister on a wave of anti-elite and anti-establishment sentiment in a country that was only 15 years old. Macedonia, formerly part of non-aligned communist Yugoslavia, became independent in 1991, and given its location in the Balkans, suddenly lay between the Eastern and Western worlds. Whilst initially pro-Western in outlook, Gruevski and his right-wing party VMRO became increasingly irritated by the Western powers' ambivalence towards Macedonia and began making not-so-furtive gestures towards Russia. At home, this was accompanied by cronyism and authoritarianism in a country already saddled with endemic corruption. Whilst Gruevski was chased out of Macedonia, which changed its name to North Macedonia in 2019, the country is still banging its head against a brick wall when it comes to EU membership, with France and Bulgaria blocking Macedonian desires to join the bloc. The reason I have decided to release this episode at the same time as the Assad episode is that both Syria and North Macedonia are examples of countries neglected by the West, possibly to the detriment of Western foreign policy goals. Just as President Obama arguably left the Syrian people in the lurch by failing to respond to the so-called red line of chemical weapons, the EU have indisputably failed North Macedonia by making the country jump through hoops towards EU membership, only to repeatedly palm the Macedonians off. These actions have caused great resentment within North Macedonia towards the European project, and the stocks of the likes of Nikola Gruevski have risen accordingly. My guest for this episode is Vlora Recica, who works as a researcher at Macedonian think tank Institute for Democracy, or IDSCS for short. Vlora and her colleagues have recently released a research paper called The Populist Citizen: Why Citizens Support Populist Leaders and Policies in North Macedonia. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to introduce Nikola Gruevski. Hi Vlora, how are you?
Hi Tom, I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Vlora, we're talking about Nikola Gruevski today. He was the Prime Minister of Macedonia between 2006 and 2016. Macedonia has, of course, changed its name since then to North Macedonia, for reasons I'm sure we'll touch on today. North Macedonia was a republic within Yugoslavia. I've done a few episodes on Yugoslavia recently, and it's an interesting country because it left Yugoslavia quite early and quite quickly in the early 90s. Can you talk a bit about those early years of Macedonia? Why was it able to leave the frying pan of Yugoslavia quite easily compared to some of its neighbours?
Oh well, I will try and give you more of a perspective of a young person. When Yugoslavia was falling out and when Macedonia left Yugoslavia, I was actually not even born. So it's a really interesting perspective looking for it to that time from my point of view as a young person in this country that has went through the name change and everything in the past 30 years. I think it's because of the focus of Serbia was not Macedonia at that point in time. You had the war and the genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and you had the turmoil that was going on over there. And then on the other hand, you had later on Kosovo and the war in Kosovo and the massacres in Kosovo. So I believe that Macedonia was not in that view of Serbia and what Serbia was trying to achieve. Also, Macedonia at that point was able to form a kind of a stable government and a stable political leadership with Kira Gligorov. And with forming that kind of stable leadership, it was able to implement policies that could make it easier for the country to break away from Yugoslavia. Despite its other problems, which dragged on, mainly with Greece until 2018, the country was in good relations with the other Yugoslav countries. So there wasn't really a reason in the 90s for that to happen. But then again, in 2001, you have the conflict, which was mainly because of internal issues rather than neighborly issues in Yugoslavia.
I think at this point it's worth trying to sort of lay out some of the terminological differences when it comes to Macedonia. Macedonia was the name of the country we're studying today until 2019, and its name then changed to North Macedonia. I appreciate I might be opening up a kind of Pandora's box here, really, but can you differentiate a bit as to what some people mean by Macedonia as in the wider region of Macedonia? Because the region that's called Macedonia often and the country that's Macedonia or North Macedonia aren't exactly the same place.
Oh, well, that's true. You have the northern region of Greece that's called Macedonia, and was the main point of contestation, and that's the main reason why Macedonia was pushed to change its, the Republic of Macedonia was pushed to change its name. The main argument of Greece was territorial pretensions, which honestly wasn't really true. The then Republic of Macedonia didn't ever push for such for such ideas. They never even declared such ideas of any territorial pretensions. And I'm sorry, there are some screaming children.
Don't worry.
Thank you. So we're having a shaky start of the podcast, but I'm going to try. Those territorial pretensions never existed in the country. No political leader in then Republic Macedonia expressed such pretensions. They even were willing to sign any treaty or document that would say that we do not pretend any territorial grabbing or anything in Greece. However, this wasn't really enough for Greece, which pushed the name dispute for more than 2 decades, since the 90s. So I lived most of my life in that kind of following that dispute. I also lived what Gruevski would do then later since 2008 and forward. He would push this kind of narrative of antiquity in the country to just kind of piss off the Greek, because there were a lot of people in the country still believe, even after the name change, that what the Greek were asking did not have any ground. So it just pushed a lot of turmoil within the country, and it polarized a lot of the people within the Republic of Macedonia and North Macedonia now still.
If we move on to talking about Gruevski today, Nikola Gruevski was born in 1970. He was a young man in the 1990s. He was 21 when Macedonia became an independent country. Do we know much about his kind of early career, in the early days of Macedonian independence? Do we know what he was doing?
Yeah, well, he was actually quite a successful economist. He did his degree in economics, and he was working in the field. He was quite successful as a businessman. He was kind of the first person to set up the Macedonian stock exchange. So he was quite successful in his field. He was also he always liked to mention that he was a boxer, and he was also into the arts. So Honestly, if you look at his biography and if you look at him as a person, and even if you look at him in his early political career in the 1999 and 2002 when he was Minister of Finance, he had implemented a lot of good policies, economic policies for the country. So quite a bright and sharp person as a young age. He had a lot of also political background. His uncle was Minister of Internal Affairs. And then later on, he would establish good political duo with his first cousin, Sasha Mialkov, and they would actually, in a way, run the country together rather than having one prime minister. We had a shadow prime minister during the time he ruled, but even before he ruled. So he was quite bright, quite charismatic as a young person, which also helped him a lot within his political party, VMRO, because he was able to gain leadership. I think it was in 2003. He was able to gain leadership in 2000, at a quite young age. To become leader of one of the main political parties is quite impressive.
This political party of which he was part, and the government that he was part of in between 1999 and 2002, what was its ideology? What did it essentially believe in a post-communist democratic country? What was the direction it wanted to take Macedonia in?
Well, it's a right-wing party. It's a conservative party, however, pro-democratic. So they had respect for the democratic institutions. They weren't really pro-Eastern. Actually, the thing with Gruevski was that he was kind of pioneer pro-Western conservative leader in the country, because conservative parties in the region tend to be more pro-Russian, well, in some parts pro-Turkey, and the other Eastern countries. In turn, Gruevski was quite pro-Western, and he actually brought this way of thinking within his political party, and that's the reason he was chosen president in 2000, president of VMRO in 2003, because he established himself as a Democrat, as opposed to some of his predecessors.
Quite an important event. I sort of mentioned earlier that obviously Macedonia escaped Yugoslavia quite quickly, but of the Yugoslav wars of the 90s, one affected Macedonia more than the others, and that was the war in Kosovo. And now, of course, Kosovo and Macedonia border one another, so that's not entirely surprising. But why did the war in Kosovo destabilize Macedonia to a greater extent than those other wars? And what was the nature of that destabilization?
So I'm from Kosovo originally, so I was actually also escaping the war in 1997, just before it broke out. So even with me, I always try to distance myself as a researcher from my personal story, but even with me, you can see that there is a very important link between the people. So a lot of Albanian Kosovars have been living in Macedonia even before the 1998 war, 1999 war. There were a lot of exchanges. There were a lot of families that were divided in the two countries. For me, first, I think that this personal relationship of the Albanians from Macedonia and the Albanians from Kosovo is one of the reasons that the war affected North Macedonia so much, because you have these personal stories and these personal lives that are intertwined. And as you said, it's a bordering country. Macedonia hosted the largest number of refugees from Kosovo in 1998-99, and this relationship never died down. People continue to foster these kind of relationships. For example, in 1998, my house was full with refugees from Kosovo, and we also still keep in contact with a lot of these people, and we still visit them in Kosovo. So it's an unbreakable tie. And on the other side, if we talk politically, we are talking about Albanians in North Macedonia as a minority. and at a certain point there were a discriminated minority. If you look at historically, they were not allowed to have their own university. The 1994 protests and the 1997 protests happened in Skopje, in Gostivar. They were violent, and the university was only opened in 2004. At a certain point in time, when Milosevic was introducing limiting policies on education in Kosovo, some of those policies were also implemented in North Macedonia. Albanians in the country were not included in the public administration, and that frustration and that was happening in Kosovo kind of course, had its spillover effect in North Macedonia. And Albanians in North Macedonia certainly at a point in time thought that if we cannot gain our rights in a peaceful way, we are going to try to do that in a violent way. And that's when you have the 2001 conflict. So I never justify war and conflict. I always think that things should be resolved through dialogue and through peace talks. With this, I'm just trying to understand the reasons why it started, because if I personally do not condone violence, there are actors and political actors in this country that will use any measure or tactic they deem necessary to reach their goal. And that was what happened in 2001. Some political actors that were involved also in the Kosovo War thought that that's the only way they can improve the conditions Albanians are living in North Macedonia.
Yes, you mentioned the poorly remembered, I would say, war in 2001 in northern Macedonia, where essentially the Albanian separatists attempted to create trouble for the Macedonian state and sort of form these breakaway units, perhaps some of them with the intention of eventually joining Albania. If you think about the picture that you've painted so far of Gruevski being a kind of reformer within a conservative movement, what was his attitude to the 2001 conflict and to the Albanian minority more generally? Was his attitude towards those people consistent with the picture that you've painted of him being a reformer, or was he quite a hardline figure on the Albanian question?
Well, VMRO, the political party he belonged to at the time, was a hardliner party. They were quite, at points in their political history, they have been quite far right in their opinions. For example, a lot of prominent VMRO leaders that are now in parliament that held a lot of important positions during their rulings were part of anti-Albanian protests in 2001 and in 2002 as well. They were also protesting the opening of the Albanian University in Tetovo, and these people are very prominent VMRO political figures. In turn, Gruevski wasn't really involved publicly in these anti-Albanian protests. Although one figure is that he was also a supporter of the same attitudes and the same policies that his party members and his quote-unquote friends were supporting. In terms of politically, if we look at the history, he has been quite a good partner with Albanian political parties in the country, especially with DUI. So I cannot say that his stance are anti-Albanian, but he has used a lot of nationalistic rhetoric in his political activities that could say that maybe personally he's, he discriminates in a certain minority group in this country, which I belong to.
You've spoken of him being a very intelligent man. And of somebody who can sort of who has a very capable speaker. I think given that, I don't think it's a surprise maybe that he rose to the top of his political party VMRO at such a young age, only in his early 30s, a bit like Sebastian Kurz in Austria. He became prime minister in 2006, aged 35, 36. What were the circumstances that led him into power. Was it a knock-on effect of the destabilization of the war and the problems that caused Macedonia, or were there other factors at play here?
It was definitely a failure of the then SDSM political the government. They were leading a government that was quite unsuccessful in answering a lot of grievances in the country, especially after the denationalization processes. A lot of people failed economically in that period, so there were a lot of economic grief among the population. A lot of issues that the then SSM government couldn't answer. So it's definitely a failure of the then SSM government that kind of gave him the space to gain power. And to gain a lot of power very fast due to his charisma, because I do believe that charismatic leaders will gain the votes in one way or the other, regardless of their very bad political program. So this huge space that SSM left for Gruevski is one of the main reasons he was able to rise into power in 2006. Because some of the changes that SSM made then, even with the territorial change in terms of the municipalities that were created in 2004, all of these political and economic grievances that they weren't able to address through their ruling, just gave the space for him to rise into power.
So you're referencing the sort of post-communist economic transition, the transition towards being a free market.
Yes, the denationalization that was happening then. A lot of communist power people, a lot of people that were very prominent during the Yugoslav era were able to gain a lot of money and assets after the denationalization process happened. And a lot of these people were actually part of SDSM. A lot of these people were in the structures of the party, were prominent leaders of the party, which made people equate SDSM with cronies or the bad people, the guys that are stealing our money. And a lot of people were left without an income. A lot of people were left jobless. A lot of people didn't have their lands because someone else was taking them that was closer to the government over then. And also the difference between SDSM and VMRO, which still persists to this day, is that SDSM is much more of an elitist party. It's a party of the rich, it's the party of the elite, it's the party of the smart and the intelligent people. On the other hand, VMRO has always depicted itself as the party of the people. And Nikola Gruevski was one of the pioneer populist leaders, I would say, in the region. He was able to be one of the people with the way he talked, with the way he dressed, with the way he addressed people. Because to be a man of the people, you have to be near the people, and he was near the people. So he wasn't afraid to do that. So that difference was really stark in 2006, and it was really stark even after he left power and even during his ruling. He was man of the people as opposed to what SDSM was representing for a long time and still kind of represents.
Our Prime Minister is somebody who's often, in Britain, our Prime Minister is somebody who's often referred to as a man of the people as well. The irony being that he isn't really. He comes from quite an elite background. He's not representative of most of the people in society. Do you think that that could also be said of Gruevski, that he was at this sort of man of the people thing was more of an act that people bought into rather than a reflection of his actual background?
So he comes from a middle class family. He doesn't come from a very affluent family. However, he comes from a family that has a lot of political background. As I said, his uncle was Minister of Internal Affairs. His first cousin was working with the Ministry of Internal Affairs as well. So he comes from a political background, and he comes from a family that is very smart and tactical. A lot of his background is very political. A lot of his grandparents and have been political activists. In terms of that, he has a lot of knowledge passed on politically. However, if we talk economically, he was middle class when he joined. And also when we talk about these kind of wealth, it's kind of funny to compare wealthy people in Britain and wealthy people in the Balkans, because it's a bit incomparable in terms of what wealth means for people here and what wealth means for there. But he was definitely a middle class person. He had a lot of perks in terms of that, but because even being middle class in this country means a lot in terms of being affluent and having a bit of a privilege, more than a lot of the 400,000 people that are in the brink of poverty, as some statistics show.
So if we look past 2006, then presumably he cast himself as somebody who was going to do away with these people that had taken so much of Macedonia's wealth. But in terms of, I think something that he's often known for being is a kind of is an authoritarian populist. When did those authoritarian tendencies begin to creep into his program?
I think it was post-2008. Let me set this aside. I think that VMRO as a government during their 10 years of ruling have implemented some good policies and have helped our country develop in certain ways. However, that is quite small compared to the damage they have done to us as a society and to our democracy. I do not think that their intentions were bad when they started in 2006, but I really do believe in the saying that the Lord Acton saying that power corrupts, absolute power absolutely corrupts. In 2008, they were able to gain a lot of support politically, and I think that that gave them kind of the push for them to realize that they can do a lot more than what they are doing. And after the blockade of Greece in NATO in 2008, I think that Gruevski didn't really see a perspective in EU, which, looking from the 2022 perspective, he was kind of right, because right now we are really in a very bad deadlock. I think he didn't see a really perspective in the EU, so he decided to take another route, a route that would mean of him establishing as himself as a strong leader, as a leader that will look at other avenues that could offer not just well-being to the citizens, but also for himself and his supporters and his clique. Let's say. So that's the turning point. 2008 is definitely the turning point, because afterwards he, with the rhetoric he was using, he gained a lot of support. He gained the majority in the parliament, which means that he didn't really need the votes of the opposition. He didn't need to compromise with anyone. And in a way, he gained unlimited power, and he was doing projects like Skopje 2014, which is a unthinkable, horrible project. But who was there to stop him? There was no one to stop him. He was controlling everything, from judiciary to parliament to government. And yeah, when I just said unlimited power corrupts absolutely.
Macedonia, in a way, is at the sort of gates between the Western world and the Eastern one. NATO is obviously an exponent, or is the produce of the Western world. But if Macedonia looks east, it sees Turkey, it sees the Middle East, but it also sees Russia, the Russian Federation, the post-Soviet sort of Eastern bloc. When you think about how Gruevski looked at the world in 2006 when he took over being Prime Minister, and the way that he saw the world through his premiership and towards the end of his premiership, do you think he started out as a Western-leaning person and then became a sort of definitely Eastern-leaning person, or is that too simplistic a way of thinking about this? Let me give you an example. I recently did a podcast about Alexander Vucic, who has been accused of being a sort of pro-Russian ally, but actually it's not as simple as that. There's shades of pro-EU and pro-Russian in him. Do you think that by the end of his premiership, Gruevski had any time for the West?
It's a very hard question. It's because, as you said, Europe always puts us at this position where they're saying you're the gateway to the East, and the East puts us in the position that says you're the gateway to the West, or we're the backyard of Europe, or the courtyard of Europe. All these kind of sayings, and then they put this Western Balkans, which geographically is like unthinkable to say, like, who's Eastern Balkans? Bulgaria? Like, what's Western Balkans? And everything. So they always try to define us in a way, and I'm not always fan of that, that kind of definitions that others give you. I always believe in self-determination and self-identification, and I think that a lot of people here feel European. Even if you look at the polls, IRI, they do this annual poll when they ask people different questions, and one of the questions is, who do you feel closest to? And a lot of people culturally say that they feel close to Russia, or they feel close to Eastern or to Turkey, which is understandable due to religion, due to culture, whatever. But when you ask them where do they think that they belong, the answer is always Europe. The answer is always the West. So there is a very clear image in the head of the people where they belong and where they want to be. On the other hand, you have leaders like Vučić and you have leaders like Gruevski that a lot of, well, not Vučić so much, but Gruevski that fell in a deadlock, in a position where you are being blocked and they are not allowing you to self-determine. They are not allowing you to self-identify. And the playing field is very uneven. Greece is a member of EU, Bulgaria is a member of EU, and you're just a very small country in the Balkans. So if we say, did Gruevski use this? Yeah, he definitely did use this, but he used it with the political gain in mind, with personal gain in mind. But my question is, what was the alternative at that point? In 2008, in 2006, and earlier on, what was the alternative? And I'm not saying this to justify whatever he did, because he captured the state. He used corruption. He used clientelism. He used nepotism. He limited freedom of speech. He limited freedom of media. He did all of these horrible things that Vučić is actually doing right now in Serbia. My question is, politically, looking at as a political strategist, what were his options? His options was either to focus on the well-being of the citizens, on improving economic situation in the country, or using what was happening for his own political gain. Unfortunately, he chose the later one. He chose one where he would give himself unlimited power. He would give himself richness and his partner's richness. And as every autocratic leader, it ends up with how he ended up in 2015, 16, and then fleeing the country in 2018. Is VMRO using still that tactics? Even in 2022, that political VMRO is still using the same rhetoric, the nationalistic rhetoric. It's not something that has changed. So his legacy is very strong within the party, and his legacy is very strong within the country.
I definitely want to ask you about the sort of development of his party after he's left. But you mentioned the 2015-16 protests against Gruevski there. What happened in those protests, or what were the kind of cause of those protests that led to Gruevski ultimately having to leave power? Okay, so I was thinking about this, and actually I remembered that when Gruevski came in power, I was 12, and when he left, I was 22. I was thinking about my political development throughout my high school years and my student years.
And I think that a lot of leaders, just as like Gruevski, undermine the power of the students, undermine the power of the young people too often. In 2014, even before the bombs, the SDSM bombs were coming out, the Gruevski government decided to introduce something called external examination, which would mean that every student, after they finish their studies, would have to take an external test, which is bogus because you are working for 4 years, you are passing all of your exams, and then at the end you have to pass an external exam. So people were not understanding what this was for. And the students started the protest movements. So the students formed the Student Plenum, which was a horizontal organization. They were trying to protect the autonomy of the universities. They were saying that the government has no job interfering to the autonomy of the university. This started a larger movement which kind of gave wings to the opposition and kind of gave them the opening for them to start their own campaign to abolish, to kind of take down the Gruevski government. They started with the bomb video wiretapping scandal, so they started publishing the bombs in 2015.
Can you just on that wiretapping point, can you go a bit more into what that entailed? Thank you.
Yeah, that's the thing is that everyone knew, at least from 2008 and onward, that things weren't right. So there were a lot of pressure on media. There was a lot of pressure on the judiciary. There was a lot of pressure on the university. So in general, there were a lot of government pressure. You knew that you had to be a political party member to be able to gain a job. You knew that you had to have a political party membership to be able to build your house and not get fined for it. And this is something that people talked about it, but talked about it hush. Then in 2015, when the bomb scandal, that's what we call it, the bomb scandal started, is that what we were hearing in these tapings, but was exactly what we knew. So we were hearing high officials talking about tenders. We were hearing about high officials talking about abolishing or demolishing buildings just because they didn't like who was building them. We were hearing about talking about the judiciary and about faking crimes and putting people into jail. So all of this was taped, and all of this we could hear, and we now had proof of something that we knew for a long time. And that is a very important thing. It felt liberating for a lot of people to say, I was talking about it, I knew, I was saying everything, but nobody believed me. So this is happening. And that's what happened. And it was like 20,000 people that were being wiretapped illegally by the Secret Service. So there was an infringement on everyone's right. Also, there was this very important moment in 2011 in this gathering that was in support of the VMRO government. Of a young person was killed by a policeman. It was deemed as an accident. Nobody was prosecuted, even though the family of the young boy was trying to get the justice they deserved. And in this tapes, we found out that the crime was covered by the Minister of Interior, and it was covered by the supporters and the collaborators of the Prime Minister, which was really important in the fight against police brutality. And this is what spiked the May 5th protests, where there was a lot of violence. This is what spiked later the May 17th protests, and what was continuing even in 2016, after the Prigino government was established, when the president tried to pardon the people that were involved in the wiretapping scandal. So when this happened, this also angered not just the students, not just the young people, this angered everyone in the society. And these protests are the most multi-ethnic protests we have ever had, because a lot of people came out protesting the government, the Gruevski government, and the anger they were showing. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the protests were at one point hijacked by the opposition parties, as it always happened. But the thing that I don't want to do, and the thing that I see a lot of people doing, is undermining the genuine anger of people when they were going out on the streets. because they were tired of having to be a member of a political party. They were tired of having to have someone in the public administration. They were tired of going to the judiciary and losing just because they didn't have the right connections and the money. So yeah, all of this anger blew with the bomb video wiretapings because they were able to confirm everything that they were already knowing. So then is when the negotiations had to happen. I don't know if you remember the Prigina negotiations, which were mediated by EU. Which, in my opinion, I wish we could be able more to resolve our issues internally rather than have mediation by US and EU. But EU took a more stronger stance this time, and they mediated the Prigina agreement, which wasn't really successful if you look at the situation. You said that we were going to talk later, but it kind of always connects to 2022, because if you look at 2022, what did the Prigina agreement really change? We established the Special Prosecutor Office, and the leader special prosecutor that was elected and was proposed and accepted by VMRO ended up in jail. She is in jail because she tried to corrupt witnesses. And it's just mind-boggling that one of the main issues and the reason that we didn't want the VMRO government, the Gruevski government, is just a recurring problem and is frustrating for a lot of people.
So just to backtrack a little bit there, Gruevski, as a result of the protests that exploded because of the wiretapping scandal, Gruevski resigned in January 2016. This was after, obviously a 10-year period in government. What was the nature of the government that came after him? Something that I've explored a couple of times on the podcast is that populist governments tend to be replaced by very different technocratic, quiet governments, in a way, led by diligent, quiet people. Was that the case in Macedonia after 2016?
You're spot on. So in 2017, this very reformist government came into place. The civil society sector, which I'm part of, is actually, we have had a very good partner in the government. They have open doors. They are more cooperative. They are more open to the citizens' opinion. They are a genuinely reformist government, and they have implemented a lot of reforms that are supposed to help our democracy and our democratization process, everything. However, one of the issues that is still prevalent, even with this government, is corruption. And nepotism and clientelism. Why? It's because this system of corruption is ingrained in all of our institutions. It's kind of something you see everywhere. You go to the doctors, corruption. You go to the public administration, you need to document corruption. You go to school, even through your education, there is a lot of corruptive actions. In universities, there is corruption. So even with the change of government, which promised to deliver a lot, and they have delivered a lot, starting with the reforms, starting with the name change, starting with our trying to open our process with EU, NATO membership. These are very big reforms. Even now with what's happening with the church and the independence of the Macedonian church, all of these are very big reforms, but they are not dealing with the main issue that affects me as a citizen every day, and that is corruption. And that's the one main issue that you need to deal with for people to kind of believe that you are doing something for them, because that's the everyday change you see.
And from what you said a second ago about the investigation into Nikola Gruevski, it might help if we go through some of the substance of that investigation. Mm-hmm. What was the investigation about?
Oh, well, so Gruevski is not actually in jail. He's in Hungary. He has political asylum. Our country has sent a request for extradition, which Hungary has rejected. So he's actually having a very successful businesses in Orban's Hungary. He is actually a very rich man in Hungary, and a lot of that thanks to the money of the citizens of North Macedonia. Out of all of the things that Gruevski did, in 2018 he was convicted for buying a Mercedes with countries with our state budget of 600,000 euros, which is a lot of money. It's a very expensive Mercedes. So he bought this car and he was convicted for 2 years. He was supposed to be in jail in November 2018, and all of a sudden everybody lost track of him because his passport was actually confiscated. So it was supposed to stop him from leaving the country. However, it was later found out that he was able to leave the country through Albania with the help of Hungary official cars, diplomatic cars. He was able to go through Serbia and through Montenegro and Serbia and reach Hungary. And the way that we found out that he escaped the country was with the Facebook posts. So after him missing for 5 days since the day he was supposed to be in jail, he wrote a post on Facebook. This is something that he's been doing very often. Everything something major happens in the country, he will do a Facebook post, and this is we call this the resurrection of Gruevski, because it's time after time he does these posts on Facebook which are very funny. But a lot of people still love him here, so it's interesting to see the likes and the response. So he did a post and he said, "I'm being persecuted, I'm being politically prosecuted, so I've been here asking for political asylum," which he gained through his right-wing partner, Orban. And he's been there since 2018. For 4 years, he's been living in Hungary. In 2020-21, he was actually convicted for another in absence for another money laundering scheme for buying land in one of the most prominent parts of the city, and which was legal. And and his partners were also convicted, but he managed. And this sentence is for 7 years, but he's not serving it because we haven't been able to extradite him from Hungary to here. A lot of his close collaborators are in prison, which is surprising. So even his first cousin, we called him actually the one who should not be named, just like Lord Voldemort. For a long period of time, Sasha Myalkov, his name wasn't really able to be mentioned among people. We were scared because he was the Secret Service. Nobody knew what he was doing. He's actually convicted and he's supposed to serve a sentence, but he paid a lot of money for bail, so he's not in prison. But a lot of his close collaborated, like Gordana Yankulovska, Miljana Kijevski, Kamchev, a lot of these people are now serving their sentences. Chavkov, they are serving their sentences in prison, which is kind of a celebratory moment for the citizens of these countries, because these people have done a lot of harm to them and to certain people more than to others.
You mentioned that Gruevski is still quite popular in your country. Is the kind of political nature of VMRO, the party, is it still quite populist and authoritarian in nature? Do you think you could have another Gruevski in the future?
So what they tried to do in 2018, after the attack in the parliament in 2017, I don't know if you're aware of this, in 27th of April 2017, there was an attack in the parliament when they were electing the president of the parliament, which was an attack to our democracy, honestly. There were a lot of actors involved. A lot of these actors were VMRO actors and VMRO MPs. After that incident, after that Nikola Gruevski resigned even from the leadership of the party. Christian Mickovski is the one that succeeded him. And they tried to say that they are reforming. So they tried to push this reformist narrative within VMRO, that saying that we are a new party with fresh blood, with new people. But a lot of the old people are still in the party. There are still major actors in the policies of the party. Does the party have a different rhetoric? It does have a different rhetoric. It's much milder than what Gruevski was doing. It's because that Christian Mickovski does not have the charisma that Gruevski had. So he has to be much more careful with what he's saying and what he's doing. Is the party still conservative and right-wing? Yes, the party is still conservative and it's right-wing. The policies they represent are conservative and right-wing. Sometimes they're constructive, sometimes they tend to be very destructive opposition. However, all the polling is showing that actually at this moment, they have more support than any political party in the country. I think that one of the reasons is with these reformist parties and governments like the one of SDSM, people have very high hopes when they come into power. And since no government can really fulfill those high hopes, reformist governments tend to kind of die down. And VMRO is really using this. It's using what Bulgaria is doing with the blockade, with the blocking of our EU process. It's using what France is doing with blocking and what Netherlands was doing back in 2019 to just kind of establish their position more among voters. And in 2020, during the local elections, they won with major differences. They won a lot of the municipalities that SDSM was holding. So these kind of grievances and what the pandemic has done and the economic crisis, a lot of these issues are just fueling discontent among the citizens, which VMRO has been able to really reap the benefits of with their nationalistic and right-wing narrative. And sometimes even anti-Western, but not that much.
You mentioned EU accession there, and obviously North Macedonia has been trying to get into the EU for a long time, but I want to just finish by talking about your relationship to another international institution, which is NATO. North Macedonia is the most recent country to join NATO. It joined in 2019. In terms of when we were talking about North Macedonia being Western or Eastern facing, do you think that joining NATO is the conclusion of that discussion now? Do you think that it basically guarantees North Macedonia's future as a Western-facing country, even if, say, a Gruevski figure came back who was a bit more agnostic towards the West and maybe a bit more pro-Russian? Do you think that actually it locks you into the West?
I'm trying to find the best way to answer this. Is Macedonia a pro-Western country? I want to think of North Macedonia, more of a pro-democratic country rather than pro-Western, pro-Eastern. I'm not really a fan of this kind of dichotomy that the world is pushed into. Even though as a political scientist, I'm aware of the differences. Also, as a political scientist, I'm very against this narrative. I want to think of North Macedonia as a pro-democratic country, a country that, and in that sense, we can say that, yes, the country is locked in this pro-Western narrative, in this pro-Western way of thinking, in this pro-Western alliance, let's say. So yeah, NATO was kind of a step that established this, but there needs to be a next step. And the thing is that the blockade that Bulgaria is doing right now, even with NATO, even with Macedonia being part of the NATO, even the citizens being pro-democratic, even with the citizens being pro-Western, this frustration that the name change has caused, and this frustration that Bulgaria is causing right now is pushing people to the edge with their support to Western countries, not Western values, Western countries. Is pushing them to an end with EU, is pushing them to an end with France and their new techniques of accession and negotiations, is pushing them to an end in believing in the EU ideal. All the polls are showing that people's support for EU is falling, is dropping, even among the Albanian community, which is the most pro-Western nation in the region. The support is dropping. Support for democracy is not dropping. Support for EU is dropping. And I think that is something that EU and Western countries and Western European countries need to think about, and something that they need to realize. My hope is that this frustration with EU is going to push a more regional cooperation, is going to push for people and political leaders in the country will create a better well-being without relying in the EU. But what my hope is, and what reality is showing, is quite different. We can see what is happening in Serbia. We can see what is happening in Albania. We can see what is happening even here. And imagine VMRO winning elections, and imagine having again a conservative and a right-wing party, and imagine the damage they could do. Even having Gruevski back, because when you have the power, you can do that. So all of those are dangers that need to be taken into consideration. As I said, I would say that the country is a pro-democratic one. It's a pro-Western one. NATO helped that narrative, but not as much as we hoped for.
It sounds as if the EU really is the kind of missing link there.
Definitely, and what happened with Greece and what's happened with Bulgaria is just a slap in the face for the country, because we changed our name and we were promised something, and that promise was not delivered. So of course there's frustration, polarization in the country. It was expected. Even with NATO happening, frustrations are genuine.
How do you see it ending with the dispute with Bulgaria? Bulgaria obviously being an EU country and Macedonia not being one. How do you see it ending?
Not positively, and a lot of the talks I have with a lot of my friends and a lot of research and a lot of people that are more prominent researchers in the IR theory, they do not see it ending it well, because the playing field, as I said, is not even. Bulgaria is an EU member, North Macedonia is not an EU member. EU votes unanimously, and until the EU reforms itself, until EU introduces different types of voting, there will not be a future for North Macedonia in the EU, even if they open negotiations. Serbia and Montenegro have opened negotiations for almost a decade now, so nothing is happening. The same is with North Macedonia and with Albania. Honestly, my push is for more regional cooperation and democratization within the region, rather than just depending on EU and EU's decisions. Because there is a saying, the little countries do what they must, the big countries do what they want. I just want to kind of get the region and get North Macedonia out of that narrative and become a strong country with our own powers, rather than depending on the decision of Bulgaria deciding if we're Macedonians or we're not Macedonians. It's not supposed to be their decision. It's supposed to be the decisions of the people in this country.
Vlora, thank you very much. I enjoyed that. Where can people find your work? You're a researcher. Where can people find the stuff that you write?
Yeah, so most of my research is published on the website of the think tank I work at, Institute for Democracy. So it would be IDCS. I'm sorry, let me look for it to say it right. idcs.org.mk. And you can also find me on Twitter at Vlora Recica, just like my name is and surname. It's basically, that's my Twitter handle. That's where I publish most of my work as well. So yeah, those are the two channels you can basically find my work.
Vlora, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Hated and the Dead. If you've enjoyed this podcast, follow it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and, for good measure, leave us a review. You can also follow The Hated and the Dead on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, so you never miss new content.